Brokenhearted and Materialistic seem to go hand in hand. Why is that? We'll try to break that down on the program for you. Psychedelic-assisted therapies for ending one's life when one is elderly. Highly controversial. We'll get into that also on the program. And how do you describe the word wall? Lots of talk lately on just what is a wall. Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. This is America's Radio Town Hall. I present thought-provoking conversation starters with real Americans, bringing them to the microphone. These are questions that oftentimes doesn't have the exact answer or the right answer, but we get into all kinds of topics that you won't necessarily see in your newspapers or certainly not on the headlines. This week we have Dennis. Dennis is with us. He is a consultant for political campaigns. Dennis, welcome to Think America. Nice to have you, sir.
So good to be with you, Terry. Thank you.
And Jim is with us. He is also a consultant. He consults on educational matters. Hello, Jim. Nice to have you.
Hi, Terry.
All right, let's get right to it. I want to get into the hot topic. I said oftentimes on this program, we talk about things that aren't in the headlines. Well, this is in the headlines, but not necessarily a description about semantics as to the word wall. I mean, really, this is where we've come to now. What is a wall? The definition of a wall: a brick barrier, a border fence, a border security-like thing with armed guards and checkpoints, something over there versus over here. Is it an imaginary wall? What is a wall? Now, we're talking about this because obviously the president says we have a crisis on the border. Many Americans, I would imagine most Americans would say, yes, we do. All of the think tank says we've had a crisis on the border for decades. We always have a problem. And it is part of the larger awning called illegal immigration. So philosophically and practically speaking, I would say there isn't much difference between a border fence, perhaps in brick and mortar or even in steel, and maybe then in concrete. Whatever effectively separates some people from coming into the United States. And those people would be illegal until they are deemed legal and come in the legal way. Congress is certainly trying to figure out what wall means, and they're quarreling over semantics. I just chuckle at this because we all know what wall means, Dennis.
Exactly. I mean, a wall is an impenetrable border that sets us apart from another country to protect us, to keep us sovereign. And these folks are just making this devolve into a semantics argument. And it's all because they're opposed to Trump in every way possible. So I don't understand why they are pushing back on this so much when earlier in their political careers, they were actually pushing for a wall. And it just does not make sense. The only thing I can make sense of it is that these folks are so obsessed with resisting Trump that this is their new strategy.
Well, it's interesting because this semantic quarrel is a far cry from we'll build a wall and Mexico will pay for it. And that goes directly out of Trump's mouth. And it's also a far cry from the mantra of the Secure Fence Act of 2006, when Democrat leadership was all in for it, including Obama and Hillary and Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer. A wall is a wall, just like you said, Dennis. A wall is a wall. I see Kellyanne Conway kind of vacillating on this, and yet she's pointing the finger to the Democrats saying, oh, silly semantics on their part. I see Trump being willing to talk about steel as opposed to brick and mortar or solid concrete. So both sides are kind of waffling. As for the left, Nancy Pelosi has recently, Jim, said that a wall is just outright immoral. So she's taking the far left approach to all of this. How do you see wall in this discussion?
Yeah, Nancy's an idiot. The wall is a barrier to stop illegal immigration. It wasn't like Trump ran out and said, it's going to be 5.7% steel. The rest will be a mix of concrete and no. And why does it matter? We're talking about a barrier to help keep these people from illegally crossing, dying in the desert. There is a massive amount of suffering on behalf of these illegal immigrants because we don't have a secure border. So the fact that she's calling it immoral to continue the drug trafficking, the sex trafficking and human trafficking, to continue to allow a porous border to hurt these people is ridiculous. They are often misguided, like we saw from this caravan from South America, thinking that we're going to welcome them when we get here. A wall is a wonderful sign that they don't have a big welcome mat that just invites them in and allows them to take part in our welfare system.
You know, I talked about Kellyanne Conway in my comment before you weighed in, Jim. I want to go back to her and go to you again, Jim, before I flip back to Dennis. Kellyanne Conway, I think, is, while she says it's silly semantics and points the finger at the Democrats, I think she's also shrewd in the way that most of what she says, she looks at Border Patrol and says, look, the bottom line at the top of the page is we will help Border Patrol. We will listen to what they need and we will act accordingly. And Border Patrol says this is what they need. Call it a fence, call it steel, call it concrete, call it drones above, call it more armed guards, call it the military. They're listening to Border Patrol. That is politically very sharp. And it's a way to cover for her boss who said, we'll build a wall, meaning a concrete wall, and Mexico will pay for it, Jim.
It's politically sharp, but it's also great advice because these are the people on the ground watching what happens every day. You better believe they have the best ideas for how to solve these problems.
Dennis, is Kellyanne Conway playing both sides against the middle, or is she really doubling down on the Mexico will pay for it by way of saying, we'll just do what Border Patrol says they need?
She is trying to move this ball in any direction she can. And I would totally agree with President Trump keeping his promise to have Mexico pay for the wall. But I do think by going to the Border Patrol, the folks who encounter this problem every single day, that is the smartest thing to do. Though they are the experts in this area. And like energy policy, our government should be pursuing an all of the above approach to maintaining border security in any way possible, whether that's drones, whether that's a fence, whether that's folks standing there arm to arm watching south or looking for tunnels in places like Nogales, Arizona. We should be doing everything we can to stop folks from trespassing into the United States.
Jim, what do you make of former Chief of Staff John Kelly, who in my estimation kind of took a swipe on his way out to President Trump, saying basically the administration has abandoned the idea of a concrete barrier. So that's a fantasy now. What do you make of that?
I think there's a lot of people in D.C. that are commonly categorized as part of the swamp. And I think he's just identifying himself as one of those because the argument he's putting forth is extremely weak. Again, it's not like Trump specified specific materials that needed to be used in what he would refer to as a wall. In fact, he was pretty soft about how Mexico would pay for it. He was pretty soft about how to define what a wall was. And he did those things on purpose because he wanted to be able to make changes, you know?
See, I got the impression it would be a concrete wall. I'm not sure he did that on purpose, and I'm not sure he was particularly soft about it. In my sophomoric vocabulary understanding of a wall, it's like the wall I have between our backyard and my neighbor's backyard. It's concrete, and both sides have painted it. Ours is painted white, and theirs is painted a very soft, earthy green. Because it matches their roof. A wall's a wall. So back to you, Dennis. How did you interpret the swipe? I think it's kind of a swipe by John Kelly on his former boss.
I think John Kelly has been part of the professional establishment of Washington, D.C., There are folks who have dedicated their entire lives to public service, like John Kelly. And I think there is a conflict. There still remains a conflict between this administration and the professional establishment. And it tends to show through or manifest through the cycling of staff that go through the White House. And John Kelly had basically wanted to vet in the most diplomatic manner he could his grievances and issues with this White House. And that's why he made the statement he did. He comes from a very strong security background professionally. And I thought he was saying, listen, I'm the professional when it comes to national security. You need to listen to folks like us. You need to listen to Border Patrol people. You need to listen to the folks that you've asked to come on board to give you advice. And when his advice is not taken, it's a little bit hurtful. And so that's why I think he ended up making the statements that he made.
Sticking with you, Dennis, because you work in the arena of political campaigns, what do you make of the strategy that President Trump is using right now? Chuck Schumer challenged him to a shutdown. He said, okay, we're shut down. We're now into this shutdown for a couple of weeks now, if not more. And has already been an address from the border and all of that this past week. And my take is, so I'd like your comment on it, that he's working as best as he can with Congress. And Congress will be a stick in the mud. And then he'll pull the Trump card and say, okay, fine. I throw in the towel on Congress. I'm still going to adhere to the wishes of the American people. And I'm going to put this under the military's awning, and this wall will be built. What do you think of that strategy? Because I think that's where he's going.
Any party or entity that pursues a shutdown of the government is playing a high-risk maneuver. And the high risk comes in who gets to blink first. If the U.S. Senate blinks first, it's not going to look good for Trump. And at that point, I think Trump has really very little options other than possibly pursuing some kind of an executive order to pursue his goals in securing the border. It really is a high-risk maneuver. It's been done in the past, and it has tended to backfire. Now, This is a very questionable administration as to how they operate, and so anything is on the table at this point, and I wouldn't be surprised.
All right, let's leave it there, and our audience can just ponder all of this strategy as it is unfolding in this new year. Brokenhearted goes with Materialistic. How is that? There's a new study. We'll share it with you when we return on Think America. Find our podcast in the podcast square at thinkamericaradio.com on the homepage. We're back on Think America. I'm Terry Gilbert. You can find me on Facebook, Terry Talk Radio. Subscribe to our podcast by going to thinkamericaradio.com. There is a box up at the top of the webpage. It's a red box. Click there for all of our archived shows. I want to talk a little bit about being brokenhearted and how that, according to researchers say, goes hand in hand with being materialistic, believe it or not. New research shows that the love and attention people crave shows up in their material wealth. I was pretty astonished to read this, but then as upon second thought, and I read these articles again and again, I thought there is some logic to this. Broadly speaking, materialism turns out to be an effect for many people when they get their hearts broken. Sometimes it can be called shopping therapy. Get your heart broken, you decide to go out on the avenue and buy up stuff and use your credit card more than you probably should. So I want to know, I'll start with you, Jim. Has this ever happened to you? And do you really believe that possessions and wealth are the substitute for a broken heart? Either the heart is broken by your parents, and I don't mean, I mean different kinds of love. Okay, yeah. The love of a parent, of siblings, of lovers, or of friends.
Well, I think everybody in life has had something happen where emotionally they felt off put and damaged even at some point. And this really concerns me. I can't say, like you had mentioned, I can't say this surprises me, when you think about it, but how difficult people trying to find fulfillment in physical possessions that can't possibly make you feel better. Now, I would actually get it if they wanted to go out and buy some new clothes or something. If you were in a bad relationship, you got out of it, you're heartbroken, you want to feel good about yourself. I think maybe there's something with buying some new clothes that might help you feel good. But if you're just spending money trying to find some kind of fulfillment in physical possessions, oh my goodness, you're going the wrong way.
Dennis, conversely, do people with less stuff signal to you that they are, in fact, more loved?
I think it depends on whether or not they put an emphasis on personal relationships or on materialism. And so here in our culture, I think there is a struggle, and it's largely driven by our advertising climate, and everybody is constantly being told, you need to have this car, or you need to buy this kitchen device or whatever to make you happy. I think a lot of that drives this struggle, but I think people who put emphasis on relationships are probably more happy than people who seek to basically hoard material objects, and it's somewhat of a codependency. So, there's a movement called the minimalist movement. And one of the common things they say is love people and use stuff. And I think there's some truth in that, because I think when you have these relationships, you're meeting your attachment issues, your security issues, and these things are real, tangible things in people's lives to make them feel better.
The interesting thing about this that I picked up from this research was that people focus their love on something that won't reject them after they have been rejected, whether it's a tryst, whether it's a marriage, whether it's mom and dad seemingly rejected them, or a caregiver or a foster parent or whomever is is controlling the young person, is administering to that young person. It could be a coach. It could be, in other words, find something that won't reject them. And then the research also went on to kind of elaborate on this new phenomenon, and that's all this robotic stuff. The internet is there. It's this deep, I call it, it's the beast, and people are constantly feeding the beast with information. The internet doesn't reject you. So people go to robots, they go to computers, they go to sex robots. This is the new phenomenon. So I'm really curious about this, Jim. Are we in society rejecting each other more and more so that the substitute can come in? And these are substitutes called computers, the internet, these devices. Is that what's really happening in modern society?
I think that's exactly what this study is saying. And that's really concerning, because those things are not going to provide fulfillment. Those things are not going to replace that emotional loss. You're just so much better off working on yourself, to take that same energy, recognize that you may have a wrong need. You may be feeling like you need to replace that relationship with someone who won't reject you, or something that won't reject you. But work on yourself. Find a good book. Look at happy people. Pattern your life after those individuals. Don't do something silly and seek materialism or false relationships with a computer, or who knows what else people are doing.
Or else just go out and find somebody else, or perhaps a pet to love.
And sometimes you don't find that. It's not easy to find good people when people are single. It can be hard, but you can work on yourself. You always have the ability to work on yourself, and that progress, it gives you confidence. It makes you look more attractive to other people. You will feel better about yourself, and you got to work on those things, or seeking fulfillment in these empty places is just going to cause you problems.
Good advice. Let's leave it there on Think America. Thanks for a robust discussion on that, guys. When we come back, electric vehicle subsidies, are they going to be phased out? On Think America, reason first, then converse. Find our podcast at thinkamericaradio.com. We're back on Think America with Terry Gilbert, where we reason first and then converse. Time now for a live interview with Phil Kerpen. Phil, you know his name. He's done a lot of radio. Presently, he is the president of American Commitment. You can find him at americancommitment.org. I want to ask Phil on why President Trump and Congress should, in fact, end the electric vehicle subsidy or not. Phil believes that America, that is the largest oil and gas producer in the world, and electric vehicles are now a mature enough technology that should be left to succeed or to fail on the preference of consumers and not politicians. I agree with that. Phil Kerpen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Terry. Great to be with you.
Nice to have you. All right, let's start with the subsidy. Most Americans know that this is a subsidy that has been with us for a while, but they might not know that President Trump says he wants to end it for at least General Motors with their electric car line. It could just phase out on its own, I'm told, though. So should Trump get involved or leave it alone?
Well, if Congress tries to lift or extend the cap or cancel the phase-out, it would be great for the president to tell them he will not sign any bill to do that. And that's why I think that tweet about General Motors was particularly helpful and particularly timely, because General Motors just this week announced that before the end of 2018, they did reach 200,000 electric vehicles sold, which makes them the second company. Tesla reached that level as well last year, that will now be in the phase-out period. The way this subsidy was originally written, each manufacturer gets 200,000 vehicles that are subsidized at the full amount of $7,500 for a full plug-in battery electric vehicle, and it's less for plug-in hybrids. But they get that $7,500 subsidy for each unit sold to 200,000. Then they go into a phase-out period where for 6 months it's half the subsidy amount, for 6 months it's a quarter, and then it's gone. And so the two largest manufacturers, Tesla and General Motors, are now under current law entering that phase-out period. I think starting in April, starting the second quarter of this year, that it'll only be half of the subsidy amount, and then it'll go down 6 months later to a quarter, and then 6 months later it'll be gone, April of next year. And so there's going to be a furious over-the-top lobbying push by General Motors and Tesla and their various allies to get Congress to eliminate that phase-out, and that's what we're going to be fighting against here, starting imminently. They're actually already underway lobbying for that.
So let me get this straight. Post-April, we're going to hear from Tesla and GM, and that's why Trump gave a little shot across the bow saying that he wants to end the subsidies. Is that it in a nutshell, so our listeners really understand?
Yeah, he wants to let the subsidy phase-out happen the way it was supposed to back when Congress passed this law 10 years ago. And, the argument for getting rid of the phase-out now is completely crazy, because the original rationale for subsidizing electric vehicles doesn't even apply anymore. As you noted in your introduction there, we're now the largest oil producer in the world. In fact, we are now net oil exporters. We export more oil from the United States than we import. We have achieved energy independence and then some with respect to oil, and we're now moving on the president's energy dominance agenda, trying to even further increase our exports. Well, the rationale behind heavily subsidizing electric vehicles, 10 years ago, was a national security rationale. We were told, look, it's too risky to be dependent on foreign oil. We've got to move our vehicles off of oil onto electricity so they're less susceptible to supply disruptions. Well, now we're in a completely different state of affairs where we're actually net oil exporters. And the irony of this, Terry, is it's the electric vehicles that are more susceptible to supply shocks because they are import dependent in that the batteries that need to be replaced eventually at some point in the life cycle of those vehicles, they do depend on rare earth minerals, particularly cobalt, which all of the batteries use. They can only be sourced from a handful of places abroad. And so the irony here is that we're subsidizing a move away from something where we now are independent in terms of fuel source to something where we are potentially susceptible to supply shocks from abroad.
Now, I think I was reading in a recent article that you wrote, most of those who have bought electric cars and continue to do so are, of course, the rich out of California for the most part. Most are sold in California. California is heavily Democrat. And more than half of the buyers make more than $200,000 a year. I think you also pointed out nearly 80% make more than $100,000 a year. So as this phase out is going to happen, I anticipate that we'll hear a lot from California Democrats because most are sold in California, right?
More than half. The most recent monthly data I've seen had 53% of all electric vehicle sales in the United States in California. So more than half of the electric vehicles are being sold in California. There are a few reasons for that. One is that they've got a regulatory mandate at the state level that pushes things in that direction. They've also got state level subsidies, and they've also got, the headquarters of Tesla. They've got, very liberal sort of pro-electric vehicle political and social mentality there. So they've got a whole variety of policy and non-policy reasons that that's the case. So you've got a very strange situation where all of the other states are paying, as taxpayers, we're all paying for a program that overwhelmingly benefits one state. The money flows to one single state. And as you mentioned, as much as that's attractive to Democrats, and we know they have, I think they've got, 48 out of the 54 congressional seats in California now or something.
No, I think it's all of
that.
them, Phil. I think it's all of them.
Very nearly. Not quite all of them. We still have Kevin McCarthy, Devin Nunes, a handful of others.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
It's crazy compared to just a few years ago. It's overwhelmingly Democrat congressional delegation. But the statistics of, the income statistics, I think, are the reason Democrats should really oppose this subsidy program. If they claim to be, they claim to be for the regular guy and against the rich, and they say they want to tax the rich and all that kind of stuff. Less than 1% of electric vehicle subsidies go to people who make less than $50,000 because they can't afford those cars. And so we're talking about, based on the IRS statistics, about half of the subsidies go to people who make over $200,000. 80% go to people who make over $100,000. The other 20% or so go to people who make between $50,000 and $100,000, and basically nothing. 1% is to people who make less than $50,000. That's a policy we should be able to agree. Look, the original national security rationale no longer applies. The program benefits one state disproportionately. It benefits wealthier people at the expense of the rest of us. And for once, we actually have a phase-out built into the law. All we have to do to end this program is do nothing, is not have Congress revive it or cancel the phase-out. And so, I'm cautiously optimistic, especially if the president agrees, as he said in that tweet, that this could be a government program that actually ends, which, as you know, is extraordinarily rare. But there's going to be a full-court lobbying effort from GM and Tesla we're going to have to fight back against it.
Right. That actually works the way it was designed to work. We're down to about 2 minutes. I want you to comment on this. It's a minor point, but it makes a difference visually when people go into a big shopping center, for example, especially the highbrow shopping centers where you got an anchor store like Nordstrom's or Saks Fifth Avenue or Barney's or something, and you see these electric parking spaces that are still being constructed. And there could be 10 of them. There isn't even a parking space for a pregnant mother, for example, but by God, there's electric parking spaces. What do you make of all of that, and will that be phased out?
Well, that's a whole other level of subsidization. A lot of what's happening now at the local level is they're requiring developers to put these in on projects. It's sort of a shakedown, like a ransom. You've got to put these in, and so that's another sort of hidden subsidy that goes towards electric vehicles. And the electric utilities now want to have a separate rate structure so that they can charge a lower rate so that they can get this stuff built. And they're trying to work with developers also because, the electric utilities see this as a way to increase their demand and increase their sales. And so there's a lot of rent seeking in this whole industry, as there so often is. And really this federal subsidy is just the tip of the iceberg. Even at the federal level, there are all kinds of other direct grants and, research and development, subsidized loans. We all remember the Solyndra scandal. That was solar panels.
Oh, yeah.
But there's similar things going on in the vehicle industry.
Phil, I'm running out of time here, and I need to leave it there. Good information, and I hope it does die the death that it's supposed to die. Wouldn't that be interesting? But we'll be looking for it in about April or May to see what really happens. I appreciate you being on the program. Phil Kerpen, you can find him at americancommitment.org. Quick, pithy response, Dennis. What do you think about the subsidies for the electric vehicles?
Oh, we've got to get rid of that. I think corporate cronyism is a bad thing, and we definitely need to stop subsidizing and putting these false market positions out there.
Well, it was supposed to go only for 10 years. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, let it die. This is obviously a tax break for the wealthy, and it's something that liberals say they hate. So we should all be for getting rid of it.
Good. We all agree. Studies show that about 25% of Medicare spending gets poured into caring for people in the last year of their lives, which, by the way, guys, adds up to about $175 billion, roughly around that. At least that's what it was last year. Now, instead of facing legislation that would start regulating just how much physicians can spend on sick, old people, why not just make being sick and old more bearable? This is kind of the mantra that we're hearing from a doctor, Dr. Ira Byock, who calls it dying well. He's the founder and chief medical director at Providence St. Joseph Health Institute for Human Caring in Torrance, California. Now, I want to just tell you that in some quotes that he's had, and the press has picked up on this, he has said that he has had patients who have, quote, literally said to me, meaning him, that they would rather be pushed down a flight of stairs than have to face a future of crap care in some facility at the end of their lives. So his pitch, Dennis, I'll go to you first, is to look at a menu of a few things, including the most compelling of which are psychedelic-assisted therapies. In other words, look at some LSD, for example, so people are not in pain, so they are comfortable as they end their years. Do you think this is just a stealth euthanasia approach?
Well, the psychedelic chickens from the 60s are coming home to roost. Let's just put it that way. Listen, our culture, I always have to defer back to the culture on these types of questions. And it seems like we have moved on from a sanctity of life medical ethic to a quality of life medical ethic. And this is part of the quality of life ethic, where palliative care is a key component of end of life decisions. And to make it more bearable to spend those last few days, we're turning to all types of things. LSD would be his approach, or maybe other psychedelic drugs. But you can see this shift taking place within the culture with an obsession and a focus on medicinal marijuana and the move to solve our problems through drugs, to improve our quality of life. And this is not going away. This is here to stay. It's almost like watching a scene from Soylent Green, the 1973 movie, where when you die, you go to a place where you lay on a table and watch scenes of utopia take place in front of your eyes as you drift off into Valhalla. So it is an interesting place where we are in our culture, and I don't think it's going away.
Jim, what is your take on it? Is it self-euthanasia?
In a way, it could be, right? And I think the reason that this frustrated me to hear that this is a direction that's being recommended by actual doctors is because we've kind of played this game in the past. I don't care whether you're mentally ill, and we talk about the lobotomies and the electroshock therapies and things that didn't really work, but they just did them anyway. Why? This seems another form of suffering. In fact, this frustrated me because I sat and thought, if I'm getting older and I'm in pain and I'm going through health issues, the last thing I want is a doctor helping me change my mind so I actually lose even more control of my life. I don't know why anyone would want this. And so, it frustrates me. I can't say that I would support legislation denying people those kinds of choices. But at the same time, the concept for me is just way out of line.
One of the things that is said in these articles that I read about dying well is that if, for example, LSD is administered, then it's not a bad trip because the doctor is actually there. He has listened to the patient. He has formulated a care plan for the disease and the symptoms, et cetera. And part of that care plan is to not have them be all together there. The way morphine isn't all together. You're not there with morphine or Percocet or some of these other drugs when you go into an operation. It's highly controversial, of course, but this is what he says, and we'll hear what Megan has to say about it. Megan Porth, of course, comes in at the tail end of our show as a contributor. She is libertarian and an attorney, and she looks at these things from the legal eagle eye as well. She'll be with us next on this very subject, so stick around. You're listening to Think America with Terry Gilbert, and our contributor, Megan Porth, joins us during this segment. Megan is the owner and founder of YourContractShop.com. She's a contributor on this program. Your Contract Shop is one of the sponsors. It's an online legal company for all things on contracts. Megan, we've been talking about psychedelic-assisted therapies, particularly Dr. Ira Byock, who calls it dying well. He's the founder and chief medical director at the Providence St. Joseph Health Institute for Human Caring in Torrance, California. And it all has to do with, rather than the government regulating how much physicians can spend on sick people and so forth, he's more for, amid the whole insurance and Medicare and even Medicaid in some respects, certainly Medicare, the whole world of, well, rather than get into all that legislation, let's look at some things that have them in the comfort zone as they ease into their death, rather than going through how much a physician can actually spend on sick people and what a physician can give sick people, including using LSD. One of the arguments in favor of the LSD is that it won't be a bad trip for a person who's very, very sick and very, very old because the doctor is there to administrate it. I know you're libertarian. What is your opinion about this one?
Well, I think it's probably going to be pretty easy for people to assume that I am all for people choosing how they die. The issue around death is not a legislative issue. It's a social issue, and it's about our power, right, Terry? It is our power to decide how we end our life, how we end our time on this planet. And because we have such a diverse community in the United States with varying religious backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, we're going to have a lot of different opinions on how to end your life well. And I think that that's really the issue here, is we're trying to figure out how people can end their life well, where they aren't stuck in some community or in some situation or facility where they have the minimal services available to them because of the bureaucratic red tape. They can't get the treatments that they deserve or that they need, and they're uncomfortable. And in certain countries, you aren't even allowed to demand that you receive treatment, even if a doctor doesn't recommend it. So I would love to get to the point to where we are saying that, yes, doctors are valuable, doctors are knowledgeable, doctors are educated, but they don't always get to decide everything for us, Terry. And I think death is one of the most, one of the strongest tenets in a libertarian ideology, which says that we get to decide it. And if that means that you end your life on LSD, well, people end their life on morphine, Terry. It's not much different other than the psychedelic aspect of it, which you have with morphine as well.
Well,
so,
people end their
100%.
life with alcohol. People end their life drinking and driving.
Exactly. And one of the things that has always been an argument that I've run up against as far as, euthanasia, which this isn't euthanasia, this is ending your life comfortably, has been that doctors have taken the Hippocratic Oath to cause no harm. So I think that they have trouble with the fact that it's physician assisted. And that's usually where we run into some of these issues. But the truth is in this country where we have an aging baby boomer population and the millennials, although we are young, we are coming up quickly behind them, that we need to start talking about death. There's this really fascinating symposium in San Francisco in December. It's called the End Well Symposium, Terry, and it brings together all kinds of experts, designers, entrepreneurs, healthcare professionals who talk about ending life well.
Well, you mentioned before we get to Change Your Life technology that helps people live longer and does great things for them. The idea of power. We've had the sanctity of life where God gives and God ends life, as opposed to the powers in the hands of the people. We'll leave it there on that subject so that you can get to Change Your Life technology, again, sponsored by yourcontractshop.com.
Well, Terry, we use a lot of rare earth minerals out there, and there's actually some that are crucial to our development. They're magnetic, luminescent, electrochemical properties. All of these things are used for our development in multiple countries. And believe it or not, China has produced about 90% of the world's supply of rare metals up until now. And unfortunately, we're running out. Fortunately, we have a massive deposit of rare earth minerals that were discovered in Japan that could possibly meet our demands for another century. It's on an island called Ogasawara Island, and it's about 2,000 kilometers southwest of Tokyo. So I'm really excited about this.
Very interesting. I know China has bought up many of the mines, but they won't get their hands on Japan, that's for sure. Thank you, Megan, very much for your input, as always. Thank you to Dennis, and thank you to Jim, and thank you to all of our listeners and those who subscribe to our podcasts as well. You can find our podcast at thinkamericaradio.com in the red corner at the top of the homepage. I can be found at Terry Talk Radio. I'm Terry Gilbert. Till next time, reason first and then converse. Should women dress their age? What does it mean to dress one's age when 60 is the new 40? We'll discuss straight ahead on the program. We'll also talk about what's wrong with selling your own organs. Is there an ethical component to that? We'll try to figure that one out. And what does Democratic-Socialist actually mean anyway? Do we have them in America? Hello there, Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. I'm Terry Gilbert, your host on America's Radio Town Hall. This is the show where real Americans come to the microphone and participate in thought-provoking conversation starters on all kinds of topics, from lifestyle to your wallet and certainly your politics. Today we have Dennis. Dennis is with us. He joins us from the Southwest, and he's a consultant for political campaigns. Hello, Dennis. Nice to have you.
Hi, Terry. Great to be with you today.
And we're Happy New Year to you. Jim is also with us. He's a consultant in education. Jim, Happy New Year to you.
Hey, Happy New Year to you, Terry. Great to be here.
All right, let's get started on America's Radio Town Hall. And to all our affiliates across the land, Happy New Year once again. What is wrong, Dennis, with selling one's own organs? Now, before you go to answer that, think about this. One of the ethical components in all of this is that to get an organ often means to exploit the poor. poor in Syria, in India, in Sri Lanka, in Brazil, Egypt, the Philippines, and places where people are so poor that their livelihood can depend on going in oftentimes to a botched kind of operation to get an organ on the marketplace, the international marketplace, so as to feed their families. Now, when you buy an organ, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get an organ from another country. You might get an organ from a family member, but this is the big ethical component in this question. The poor will often bear the brunt of losing their own organ so as to survive and to feed a family. People take all kinds of risks all the time, however, with all kinds of occupations, not just with feeding one's family by selling an organ. Many people feed their family by being a firefighter, for example, or a police officer, or working undercover. And those are very dangerous operations as well, and occupations. What do you think people should be looking at when they look at this issue of selling their own organs, Dennis?
This is a tough situation because there's a part of people who want to say you should be able to do with whatever you want to do with your body. And that tends to happen here in the United States. And there are folks who are saying this will lead to exploitation of people who are desperate, that have no hope. And this is their last thing to possibly give away to get some money to take care of their family. And that's the problem. There's health issues related to this as well. And from what studies have shown, folks tend to go through all kinds of negative health issues like depression, self-hatred, issues with isolation, regret, all of those types of things. And so that figures into what happens. It also takes away an individual's ability to continue working and to provide for their family through the fruits of their labor. So it's a very tough thing, but I do think there are some solutions to that, and we can get into that if you'd like. Well,
just before I go to Jim, what would be off the top of your head solution to it? Stick with organs in the United States and bypass this ethical dilemma?
Sure. I think one of the big things, there's two things that can be done. One is to implement a waiting period as to somebody, and this is pertinent specifically to people who are in poverty who want to make a donation, is not to provide immediate cash, because oftentimes that's what the situation is. They're looking for a quick cash. And the other option is to implement a waiting period so that they have time to think about what they're doing. And then finally, a third party really should be the entity that handles these types of transactions between a donor and a recipient.
I just don't understand how this doesn't come up all the time. Organ and tissue banks make ridiculous amounts of profit, and no one screams ethics at them when they do so. There are plenty of things that people physically sell off their bodies quite often. This happens a lot with reproductive issues. My point being, when we start telling people you can't make money, don't kid yourself. Somebody's going to make money doing this.
True.
So why restrict it from the individual? If we're going to restrict it from the individual, all we're going to do is allow others to keep the profit. This is happening now. This is something we have to deal with. We don't sit there and look at other dangerous jobs and go, oh, we're taking advantage of the poor when they make money on this. When these guys go into the Bering Straits and they're out there fishing and they have this massive mortality rate, we don't sit there and go, well, we're taking advantage of these poor, ignorant fishermen. And
you raise a good point, because the kidney hunters are unregulated by and large and do make a ton. And that's the middleman person, Jim.
That's right. And understand, we do this all the time as a society. Do we take advantage of a minimum wage worker because they're only going to get minimum wage for their hour of effort when others make so much more? You know, the ethics doesn't really change. What changes is whether or not government steps in and starts telling people what they can do and what they can't do in ways which are frankly inappropriate. If we know this is happening, we know that there's a need for this. We also know there's some reasonable things that people can be able to sell or even donate if they choose to family members, and it happens all the time. The last thing I want is the government stepping in, over-regulating this. It's only going to hurt the individual. I'm all for educating. I don't think anybody's going to give up a kidney without being educated on what's going to happen to them. I'm all for it. But yeah, I don't want to see any more government intrusion into what people should have as a freedom.
Government is that next element that I did want to get to. But while we stay on the ethical side, and we'll get back to government in a minute, Dennis, the argument for not doing this is that a kidney is not a spare organ. Unlike what a lot of people think, it really isn't. There is a psychological, and you mentioned this at the top, Dennis, strain that is very great with regard to working with one's whole body if you are a laborer. And most of these people that are giving up organs are laborers. So they're coming from Egypt and Brazil and Moldova and Sri Lanka and so forth. They need their whole body. It's not like they can spare an organ. So from that standpoint, maybe that should be looked at. And then we need to, of course, get into how the government looks at it and whether the government should have a hand in this, Dennis.
Yeah, Terry, you're right about it, that those who tend to seek compensation for this from other countries. And by the way, I think Iran is the only country that this is legal. So it's somewhat of a black market that governments across the globe don't really regulate, or if they do, it's very lackadaisical. But they tend to be blue collar folks, laborers. And once they give up that kidney, that puts them at a disadvantage in performing their labor issues. If we go back here to the United States and we pursue an alternative, and that being the third party handles this and provides a solution, the donor should be compensated in one way or another, not necessarily with cash, but maybe 10 years of free health care, or something like a tax credit, or some other way that takes the cash incentive out of it, such that it doesn't create a system where there are ways for people to exploit it. So
let me ask you something directly, Dennis, then I'll go to you too, Jim, about this directly. If you were in this situation and you needed a kidney, or a family member, Dennis, of yours needed a kidney, would you seek a kidney from overseas? You personally?
I would not. I would tend to work within the family to try to listen. There's a quality component to seeking out an organ. And by the way, there is a difference between organs and tissue that I think you inferred a little bit earlier. But if this is a one-time thing, I would rather keep it with somebody I know, somebody who we have a relationship. There's a quality component, as I said, that makes me worry. Like, are you going to get a good, healthy kidney from somebody that's in Bangladesh or India? And I think people are concerned about that. Even among those in poverty, you run the risk of getting one from somebody who has hepatitis or some other issue that you're concerned about.
True. And Jim, to you, the same question. And bear in mind, let's say, Jim, you had let's say you needed a kidney. You had no family that could donate a kidney for you. Would you seek a kidney, you personally, outside of the United States?
Sure. I understand the concerns that Dennis mentioned, and certainly those are real. And so is the concern over not having a kidney. So, yeah, I'd do what I need to do to get the kidney.
Right. There's so much at stake in all of this, and there's a gray zone morally and socially. I hear that from both of you when selling organs. And that's the selling part, the receiving part, and the payment part. I hear less ethical concern. I hear more, listen, I got to make a living. This is what I do. It's legal to do this. I'll work within any kind of kidney hunter that comes on and helps me out. Same kind of ethical concern, Jim, if you're on the receiving side as it is on the selling side. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I mean, there's an ethical concern with everything we do in life. We do our best. We make the best decisions we can, and we move forward. But some of this stuff is life and death. You get to a point where you're going to die. You need to do what you need to do to keep going. And in these instances, whether it's a kidney, a lung, or a piece of liver. These are things that somebody can donate and live. It would have an effect on them. If there's a monetary exchange for them, I don't see an issue with that. And if it helps somebody live, how wonderful that we can do that.
That's the other point of view. Dennis, do you concur with that? You seem to be a little more shy than Jim's point.
I'm a little bit hesitant on that. If we're talking specifically about the recipient and not the donor, I think the recipient should be concerned that what they are getting is a healthy organ and that there is no shortcuts taken or quality control issues taken by the donor or the third party intermediary. You want to make sure that what you get is a healthy organ that you're going to survive on, and you're not going to run into any problems, hopefully not with the medical problems with regard to rejection. So I would be concerned about making sure it's a really good, healthy kidney or organ as the recipient.
And then you don't have to go through all these international hoops to get an organ from out of the country. That's true, too. All right. Good discussion, both of you, to kick off this edition of Think America. You can find me on Facebook at Terry Talk Radio. You can find the show and all of our archived podcasts at thinkamericaradio.com. Straight ahead, should women dress their age and not wear what they maybe want to wear? Look for a robust discussion on this one straight ahead. Welcome back to Think America. Should women dress their age or wear what they like and what they think looks good on their bodies, such as a sassy outfit or a very short skirt or that skinny black dress, right? What does it mean actually to dress one's age when 60 is now the new 40 and when 70 is the new 50 and when casual dressing seems to be accepted for everybody else except, well, women? Dennis, take a crack at this.
Hey, if you've got the form, wear whatever you want. And
so if you got it, flaunt it.
Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with dressing how you feel. I think that's appropriate. Oftentimes, I think what we see is popular culture tries to shame people into dressing according to some standards, or they try to shame people for dressing too casually. So, for example, a younger 13-year-old girl who is dressing like a 20-year-old, you tend to see that as an inappropriate cultural thing. And I would tend to agree with that. I think younger girls should not dress as if they are heading out and doing things that most people would question. But I do think if you're older and you've got the body to wear whatever you want, go for it.
Well, where do you draw the line on Dennis's point, Jim? Young girls look at older women as role models.
Sure. Well, I don't like the comment about dressing their age because, especially as people get older, I think, kind of like Dennis had mentioned, you should be able to wear what you feel comfortable with, but there are things that I don't like. I don't want to see a 14-year-old girl with her rear end hanging out of her Daisy Dukes. I think it's not sanitary, but it's not dressing proper and appropriate for a child. Those things bother me. But, I think that for our discussion, what we're really talking a lot about is that women often feel that society is going to look at them and judge them if they try to wear something that younger people may wear as they get a little older in life. And I think that's just silly. That kind of stuff just shouldn't happen. Frankly, I see men that wear things they shouldn't be wearing all the time, much more so than women. Guys, socks and sandals, don't do it.
Well, I think the adage is comfortable so that you're confident. But there's a lot of confidence already out there with the younger set. And we see this in all kinds of ways, especially with women. And women, I'm hearing, maybe this is the feminist influence. those that say don't be sexist, all of that wrapped up into this new feminist movement that's upon us. Why is the onus on women and in turn girls, Jim, to cover up more? And on that, I would want you to comment on this angle, because men are visual. That's why. And so we've got a biological component and we've got a behavioral component. And since you're a man, take that one away.
Well, that's true. Men are visual. However, men are not the ones wearing, yoga pants all day. Men are not the ones typically in short shorts with their rear ends hanging out. They don't go to those lengths and they don't feel the need to do that to attract a mate or whatever reasoning that someone might have to do it. And so that's one of the reasons for it. I don't think it's so much a sexist thing as it is, fashion choices. Maybe we can blame the fashionistas for those decisions as being sexist. But, for people, women find certain things attractive in people. Men find certain things attractive in people. Trying to nail that one down is going to be tough. But when we're talking about these fashion choices and how it relates to what they should or shouldn't wear, sure, I see women in yoga pants. I'm thinking, man, if I was her, I wouldn't wear those freaking yoga pants, But if she's coming out of yoga, great. My understanding, most people wearing yoga pants didn't just come out of yoga. It's kind of the thing they all wear right now. So I don't know. I don't want to put pressure on people, to be self-conscious and to feel bad about themselves and their bodies. But if you don't look good, don't look good. Men, don't lie to your wife. If she doesn't look right, tell her. My wife appreciates it if I tell her, honey, that doesn't look really good right now.
Dennis, we're down to about 2 minutes. I want you to have a crack at that. The idea that men are visual, and so women, the onus on women covering up more is upon them, right?
Yeah, men are indeed visual. They tend to be stimulated more by visual. Women tend to be more by verbal. And so men in this climate right now, men are somewhat at a disadvantage because everything they say, the way they look at people is questioned via the Me Too movement. And it puts a lot of pressure on men to keep their mouths shut and to watch their behavior more closely. And that's a good thing. This conversation tends to be driven more among women than men. I think that we ought to be real careful about what we say women should wear. But again, I think that choice belongs to women. If they have close people to them, they should speak up and say, hey, I think you're looking too scantily clad. If you're going out tonight, maybe you might want to put a sweater on or something along those lines.
Well, that's hard to do when you've got, as per this article that I sent both of you, Jennifer Lopez at almost 50 years old dressing like an ingenue, because those are the role models. It might be wishful thinking on your part, but those are the role models. When we come back, my interview with a woman in staffing at a staffing firm. She is a CEO that holds a very high rate of placement of candidates into jobs, and on this very subject with the power of color on clothing. So stick around. We'll continue this line of thought. Welcome back to Think America with Terry Gilberg. This is America's Radio Town Hall. Time now for my interview with Jackie Ducci. She is the CEO and founder of Ducci and Associates. It is a hiring and staffing firm that holds a very high rate of placement of candidates into jobs. And one of the reasons for that, and she'll comment on this in a minute, is the power of color, how that plays into a job interview for dressing for success. Hello, Jackie. Welcome to Think America.
Good morning. How are you?
Nice to have you on the program. Jackie, according to Money Magazine, certain colors play best in a job interview to win the job. So let's start our talk with what are those colors? And then we'll dovetail into, should everybody wear those colors? Because I've got some specific questions about whether or not these traditional colors work for everybody.
Sure. So the conventional wisdom is to go neutral when in doubt. So colors like navy blue, hunter green, cream, black, nothing that's going to be too loud. And I always tell people that, especially a first interview is not the time to take a big risk and be bold, because you just don't know how it's going to be received. So generally, I suggest to go neutral.
Well, when you say neutral, I don't think green is neutral.
A darker green, I would say, would be, because it's like an earth tone. So something of that nature would be okay.
So what you mean is don't come in with stripes and polka dots on your jacket.
Right. Nothing too loud. And for example, I read a survey recently that said they had interviewed 2,000 hiring managers, and they had said that orange is the worst color that you can wear.
I believe that.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Just anything that's going to really stand out and distract from what you're saying, as opposed to, you want people to focus on what you're saying and not what you're wearing. So I think that's the key.
You know what I often find too, and not that I'm in the hiring business, but I find men that wear winter suits during the summer, because that's the suit that they have. Maybe it's a first time job. I have coached and I have judged many a speech contest for high school students, and they're always in black. And I think that is the worst thing, because I don't remember you from the next kid, right? And it'll be maybe a spring speech contest, and they're in some heavy black from winter. So I understand that if you don't have something in your closet that is seasonal ready, you probably should go out and get that tan linen suit if it's a summer interview. But a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of dress the part and to be classic and elegant, but also stand out in your own way. So, when women say to me, well, red is my thing, I really want to wear red, I'll say, maybe a red accessory or something like that. So you can still show your personality and be appropriate, but not over the top, I think is the key.
Well, I think the message first and foremost is to tone it down a little bit, be buttoned up to a degree. But still, your personality can come out through eye contact and the way you sit and, of course, what you say. Let's talk about the tone of the color. And this is where I want to get into it a little bit. Many years ago, I had the luxury. It was given to me as a Christmas present. I was in New York, and my sister had gone to a fashionista lady and a makeup lady, and she loved this look that this woman did with clothing as to her tone of her skin. And the woman, and she gave me a similar present with the same woman in makeup and in fashion. And the idea is that the woman would drape you in either gold tones or in silver tones. Put a big old fat silver earring on my left ear and a big old fat gold earring on my right ear, and then would drape. And it was very interesting, because when you say blue, there's a difference between navy blue, gray blue, and sky blue. And this is where the tones come in. As it turns out, I was a warm autumn, not just warm, but a warm autumn. And my older sister, same family, right, is a silver, cold, silvery winter, what is it called? Cool winter. All right. So there's a big difference. So now I took my palette with me, these little swatches that she gives me, and I've used it now when I look at my own wardrobe. And believe it or not, I've saved a lot of money, got rid of all that fuchsia and all that cobalt pink that I used to wear in the 80s. And now it's more earth tones. So can you comment a little bit on how that can help a person kind of stand out in an interview because it goes with their skin tones?
Sure. Yes, different things look best on different people. So sometimes it takes a little bit of experimentation, like you said, to figure out what are your tones, what are your colors. The other thing that I've heard is accentuating eye color is actually very powerful. So, for example, going back to green, if you have green eyes and you wear a dark green dress, it's really going to make your eyes pop. And that can be very attractive. And I've heard hiring managers say they really subtly they appreciate it because it keeps them focused on that person's face. So I would definitely look at eye color as well when you're picking what to wear.
But not sky blue eyeshadow.
Definitely not.
Horrible.
No, turn down the makeup. Yes. Not the 80s.
Right. Does the same ring true for men as with women? It always seems in an interview, women are dressing more masculine to get the job. And then when they're in the job, of course, their personality comes through and the skinny black dress comes out of the closet.
I know. Yeah. Men have it so much easier in a lot of ways just because they don't have this myriad of options that women do. Yeah, I mean, I always tell women to embrace your femininity, but do it in a classy, elegant way. And I think that always goes over very well.
Pantyhose are passé. At least in my closet, they don't exist. But I've noticed that more women, when they go for a job interview, and this is true all over the country, they are wearing a sheer pantyhose. What do you say about that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't wear them personally. I don't know too many people who do. I think probably if you're comfortable without wearing them, I would say don't. I mean, especially because it's not like anyone hopefully is walking into an interview with a really short dress. Anyway, I mean, I just think just keep it simple, a really nice shoe, a knee-length dress, and then, I don't know, I'd probably skip the pantyhose.
See, I would disagree with you because every single time I look at somebody professional on television, let's just say it is Melania Trump. Let's say it's Theresa May, for example. Yep. They are in a sheer stocking. Now, you can see, and that's for spring and summer. In the fall and winter, they're in a dark sheer stocking. And something that's cut at the knee, you sit down, if you got wider hips, it's already 2-3 inches above the knee. And if you got a naked leg, I don't think that that's going to work to help seal the job.
Well, I think it's also about, you have to walk into a room feeling confident and comfortable. So maybe, you just have to find an option that looks appropriate, but that also feels good to you. If I walked in wearing the tight pantyhose, I don't know that I would feel comfortable. So I think it's just a matter of personal preference and working with what works for you.
Do you think the onus, Jackie, should be on women to conform to the men's suit role and dressing for success? Or are women finally, sort of writing their own book on what to look like for a successful job interview that seals a job?
I think more and more they are writing their own book, which is probably a good thing. I think that how you dress says a lot about you, and some people like to acknowledge that and some don't. So, you're projecting an image, and I just think that you have to, again, feel good about it and write your own rules a little bit without going over the top, and that's usually the best strategy.
Finally, in your firm, and you're the CEO and founder of Ducci and Associates, do you actually coach some of your folks as to, before they're sent out, as to what to look like? Do you send them pictures? And if so, is that helpful?
I do, and yes. And I do it particularly when I know that I have a client who has very specific preferences, or, you also have to dress for the culture, right? If you're walking into a very conservative company versus a vibrant startup, the vibe is different. So I definitely give my candidates a sense of what other people wear in that company so they can kind of dress the part a bit more easily. And they're usually very thankful for that insight.
Well, good insights all. Thank you very much. We nailed every aspect that I wanted to talk to you about. Jackie Ducci is the CEO and founder of Ducci and Associates. You can find her online, a staffing and hiring firm that holds very high rate of placement and candidates into jobs. Congratulations on that as well. Thank you, Jackie, for being on the program. You can find us at thinkamericaradio.com. Subscribe to our podcast there. Welcome back to Think America, America's Radio Town Hall with Dennis and Jim this week. Democrat-Socialists believe that the systemic issues of capitalism can only be solved, guys, by replacing the capitalist system with the state system. In other words, replacing private ownership with state ownership, sometimes referred to as social ownership, but it really is state ownership of the means of production. We've heard that a lot. That's the key, the means of production. So why do you think, Jim, I'll go to you first. Why do you think so many of our left-leaning politicians say that Sweden is an example of democratic socialism that's very successful, unlike Cuba and Venezuela, when in fact Sweden is not socialist because the government doesn't own the means of production there? Jim.
That's right. And the irony about the foolishness of that comment is the Swedish model is simply not sustainable. They have an aging population. They have massive inefficiencies in the public sector, and part of that's a result of their misguided tax policies. They're a doomed welfare state. So looking at the Swiss as an example of a working state system is like taking health and nutrition advice from Rosie O'Donnell. I mean, this is like hearing Amy Schumer and Melissa McCarthy teach us all about their new Twinkie diet and how well it's working for them. This is ridiculous. How dumb do you have to be to listen to these people? The Swiss have negative interest rates right now. Their national bank has one of the worst monetary policies I've ever seen. They print money in mass and then they buy U.S. stock with it. That's their monetary policy. If you're spending $4 billion a year in the U.S. stock market printing currency, good luck.
Well, there was a time, Dennis, when Sweden was nearing the idea of ownership of the means of production, and they shored that up quite a bit. People were fed up with it, so they cut taxes and cut public spending. At one point, Sweden privatized the rail system. At one point, they eliminated the inheritance tax. They sold several state-owned businesses. Including they sold the maker of Absolute Vodka. That was sold. That was a state-owned business. It was sold then into a private ownership. So Sweden is more of a free market. And now they brag, Dennis, that because of that, they can, in fact, finance the socialist entities that they have in their health system and in their Medicare, so-called Medicare and Medicaid systems. So they are not an example like Cuba and Venezuela, to their credit.
No, they are not. And they came to their economic senses and realized this. Now, the problem is, did they forget where they came from and decided to move back in a direction where they're socializing medicine, so to say? Listen, I think that the Elizabeth Warrens and the Bernie Sanders like to use Sweden as an example when they're pushing their socialist type of agendas, because Venezuela and Cuba are not good examples of socialism being practiced. And the unfortunate thing here in our country is that we have a culture that is obsessed with people like Che Guevara and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and these folks, because socialism in the higher institutions has been popularized such that people think it's cool to push that. When you look at countries like Cuba and Venezuela, which are horrible examples of what socialism does, you have nowhere else to go but to look at Sweden, and see Sweden is not a good example.
So are you saying, Dennis, that people are, like Sanders and Warren, are deliberately misleading Americans? I assume you would say yes, because they want to win. Yes. Elizabeth Warren already has an exploratory committee. Do you think people like Ocasio-Cortez are deliberately misleading people, or is she just too uninformed?
No, they are deliberately misleading people. And I think it's because 20 years ago, folks would have looked at socialism as a horrifying thing. But because our culture is changing to the point where it's becoming more popular and acceptable, they feel they can push the envelope a little bit further to make the popular culture embrace it even more. And that's why they use these examples, and they pop their head up out of the hole. And
Jim, we're down to 30 seconds. So your last thoughts before I bring Megan Porth on board.
I think Cuba and Venezuela are great examples of how socialism works.
Agreed.
And I think it's really frustrating that they go on such a stretch as to refer to Swiss, because they have a big welfare state, as a socialist nation. It's not. Socialism doesn't work. It sucks like a vampire the life out of capitalism until capitalism dies, and then we're all dead.
When we come back, Megan Porth is with us. She's an attorney and a contributor on the program. She always comes in at this portion of Think America. She'll have something to say on this as well, considering she's also libertarian. Stick around. You're listening to Think America. Reason first, and then converse. Welcome back to Think America. Megan Porth is with us. She is a contributor, and her company sponsors Think America. You can find her at yourcontractshop.com, a legal company where she does contracts. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Terry.
Megan, we've been talking about Democrat-Socialists, and they believe that the systemic issues of capitalism can only be solved by replacing the capitalistic system with a state system. In other words, it gets back to the idea of replacing private ownership with social or state ownerships as a means of production. And what's interesting, there's an article in Reason magazine, which I had Terry's Talkers take a look at, that shows that when people like Elizabeth Warren or Sanders or Ocasio-Cortez talk about successful democratic socialism, they refer to Sweden. And yet Sweden is not a good example. They should actually look at Cuba and Venezuela to make their point. And then Americans, of course, wouldn't vote for them, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, most of these concepts are good branding, but I do have to say that there is a difference, Terry. And this is one of the things that I talk about a lot. And I want to make sure it's really, really clear for all of our listeners, because this is where we have the issue with bringing people together so that everyone understands the terms and what everyone's referring to. When we look at Sweden, there is a Nordic capitalism there. There is what we call a democratic socialist system where you have the welfare state, you have collective bargaining at the national level, you have a unionized workforce, but it's supported by free market capitalism.
Correct.
That is different than what is happening in Cuba and Venezuela. In Cuba, we have a command economy where the government determines the goods to be produced and the prices, and that's socialism. China actually moved recently from a command economy to a mixed economy, but we see this in North Korea and former Soviet Union. And then Venezuela has what's called an authoritarian centralized economy. It's very much like Leninism or Maoism, where all means of production are controlled by an authoritarian government. Now, in the United States, what the Bernie Sanders and some of these other individuals are referring to, I believe, because he's not super clear, I'll be honest with you, is a European social democracy, or what we call a social democrat. So traditionally, socialists believe that they would fight for socialism in the form of a revolution. That was the big backing behind Marxism and Leninism. We're going to get socialism and we're going to fight for it. We're going to take down the man. Democratic socialism is emphasizing what Bernie is trying to get on board here, is emphasizing the idea of voting for socialism, that we're not going to get it unless we vote for it. And I'm not happy with any of them, honestly, as a libertarian, but I just want to make sure that the listeners are aware that there is a difference. What they're trying to say is that we are social democrats. We want to vote for these things. We don't want to have some kind of authoritarian regime with their boot on our neck. But my question is always, how do you enforce these things, Terry? They may have great intentions. They may be really important for some of these people, things like Medicare, the welfare state that we already have, education, healthcare, all of these things. We're already living in a democratic socialist environment right now. My question is how do you enforce that? How do you make people conform to that? And the only way to do it, Terry, is through violence.
We do have socialistic elements. Absolutely. Look at our school system, look at Medicaid, look at Medicare. Without a doubt, we have this. But you say, how do you enforce it? I say, how are they going to get elected? Because the American public, by and large, still wants the free market capitalistic system with compassion, overall, on balance. But I'm not sure they're going to get elected, especially by way of showing contrast, because Republicans will show contrast with Cuba and Venezuela.
And they're going to take it piece by piece, and they're going to dangle the carrot out there with attractive social systems, and that's how they'll get it through.
All right, let's leave it there. What do you got in Change Your Life Technology segment, and take us out on this edition of the show?
Well, there's a lot of work in regenerative stem cells, and regenerative stem cells are really, really phenomenal for neurological disorders. So the Heidelberg University Hospital in Germany and the University of Innsbruck in Austria have figured out a way to reprogram mature human blood cells into neural stem cells, which they can inject into an injured area. And hopefully those neural stem cells will then take, because the issue that we've been having in the past, Terry, is that they have multiplied and then they grow tumors. So we're hoping that there won't be any more tumors with this new neurological regenerative medicine that's coming out.
Very good. You can find more of Think America and specifically Change Your Life Technology by going to our website where all of our archive shows are listed. And of course, the Change Your Life Technology segment is highlighted. Go to the red corner for podcast information. Thank you, Megan, very much for all of that and your contribution on Democrat-Socialist. Thank you to Dennis and thank you to Jim. We'll be back with another edition of Think America. Reason first, then converse.